variable that is just says true, and then the
well, you just do exactly that. Whatever is in the variable, or whatever is on the right-hand side, whatever that value is, you put it into the variable on the left-hand side.
So you just put true or the variable itself?
You put the value of the expression.
So true.
Yep, true, false, whatever.
Oh.
That part is actually in short-circuited evaluation. Actually had a discussion like that. You know, how you can use a variable to store a Boolean value so that you can get away from the problem that we have if we don't have short-circuited evaluation.
Yeah, I just after doing today's reading, I just figured out the Boolean value thing. I've never got that.
Well, I have to take a look. You know, I have to scan through all the questions to find out, you know, how to assign the points. So anyway, let's get started with today's topic. We are getting back to subroutines today, and I just want to kind of go back and revisit one of the programs that we visited before we took the exam. This is what we looked at on Monday last Monday, and it is a mysterious subroutine because apparently this is not possible because the subroutine is invoking itself. The subroutine is calling itself. But we know that this is not a problem because when we look at sheet 2, we can see that, you know, the subroutine traces without a problem. When we look at sheet 3, we can also see that it traces without a problem. And in sheet 3, let me just open up a new sheet so that we can see both the trace and the code at the same time. All right, so we have, you know, both the code and also the trace appearing at the same time. In this case, you know, we start execution on line 8. According to the trace, we start execution on line 8. Line 8 is quote-unquote a normal, you know, function call or a normal invocation of a subroutine because it is outside of any subroutine completely. We have to allocate a new column called D to remember that when we are done with the subroutine, we go back and continue execution at post. Now, continuing execution at post simply means you're done. Okay, that's the end of the trace. And then we go into the subroutine starting on line 2. Line 2 says, you know, if x is less than 3, do something. And since x is 2, 2 is less than 3, so we have to go to the then branch starting on line 3. Line 3 doesn't do anything really that mysterious. All it does is to add 1 to x. X went from 2 to 3, and then we go to line 4. Line 4 is invoking mysterious again. And this time it is invoking mysterious from inside mysterious. But there's no problem because, you know, the mechanism of invoking a subroutine does not change whether you're in the subroutine that you're about to invoke or whether you're somewhere else other than the subroutine that you're about to invoke. So we use exactly the same mechanism this time on line 4. We allocate a new column, which is column E. We have to remember where to go back to. In this case, the line that is logically following line 4 is actually line 6 because we don't trace line 5. Now, that's why we have to remember line 6 is the line to go back to when the subroutine is all done. And then we go into the subroutine that is being invoked, start execution on the first line, which is line 2 again. And this time line 2, the condition of line 2 becomes false because 3 is not less than 3. And because of that, we do not go into the conditional statement. We jump all the way to line 6. Line 6 is at the end of a subroutine, and therefore we have to find out, okay, where are we supposed to go back to? According to the return line number column, we're supposed to go back to line 6, and that's why we have this 6 here in the line number column. And then we have to indicate this column E is no longer in use, and then we continue execution on line 6. But line 6 is going to do exactly the same thing, which is, you know, but this time it is dealing with column D. We have to remember where are we supposed to go back to. We're supposed to go back to post, and then we have to mark that column as freed or available at this time or deallocated, and then we continue execution at post, and we're done. Are there any questions about this trace that corresponds to this code over here? Yep.
So, okay. When you first started and you did the first return line number on column D, I don't understand why we left that and never went to post after that. We kept making another column. Like we made D, and I understand that we went back to line 2, and then we made column E instead of just going to post. I don't understand that stuff.
Okay, when you're talking about this row here, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is the result of executing line 4. Because line 4 is invoke mysterious. The mechanism of invoking a subroutine has 2 steps. The first step is to allocate a new column, a column that is not being used at this point, the next available column that is free. And then you label that column return line number. And then you remember, where am I supposed to continue execution when the subroutine is done? Is that okay so far?
Kind of. Didn't we already do that though?
But this is the first invocation, which is the result of executing line 8. This on row 7 of the trace, we are tracing the execution of line 4, which is another invocation of mysterious.
Oh, so each invocation gives its own.
Yes, exactly. Everything is on a per invocation basis, not on a per subroutine basis.
There we go.
Okay?
Now I'm clear.
Okay.
Thank
Does
you.
everybody understand the difference between a per subroutine versus a per invocation basis? Because that is a big difference. Okay? Now, I'm not sure, since we were talking about Commodore 64s and all the older computers, I'll go back and talk about that a little bit. Yep.
When you say return line number 6, you go to 6 and then you end the column, and then you go to 6 again. I'm trying to understand, wouldn't you ever skip that end define? Usually, aren't we supposed to skip?
But we don't skip it when in the case of a subroutine, because the end of a subroutine is special. It actually has something to do. In addition of a marker or a bookmark indicating this is the end of the definition of a subroutine, it actually has something to do because it has to figure out where am I supposed to go.
And every time we end, we close a column and we make it available again. We have to do it. We have to do 6 twice or 3 times if we had to.
Are you talking about this row here? This indicator?
See, we have to end one, but we don't. I'm trying to understand why we didn't end both of those.
Because when you're at the end of a subroutine, every time you can only undo one invocation. Okay, so once again, we're getting back to the per invocation versus per subroutine basis. The return mechanism works on a per invocation basis. In other words, at this point, if you look at the trace, on row 9. Okay, let's go to row 9 of the trace, which is the execution of the conditional statement. At this point, okay, we have 2 invocations of the same subroutine. Okay, basically one stacked up on top of the other one. Okay, now because the condition is false, we do not get into the subroutine. We go all the way to the end of the subroutine. We don't go into the conditional statement. We go straight to the end of the subroutine. On line 6, on row 10 of the trace, on line 6, it is the end of a subroutine. So at the end of a subroutine, the mechanism that we use has also 2 steps. The first step is to look up the most recently defined return line number column so that we know where to go back to. Okay? Now, as it turns out, the line number that we're supposed to go back to is also line 6. But we don't care. We just blindly say, okay, since this one is a 6, we will put it down on row 11 so that we know the next statement to execute will be line 6. The second step of returning is to say, okay, now that we have utilized this piece of information, this column, in this case column E, is no longer needed. And that's why we have to indicate this column is now deallocated, so that in case I need to call or invoke another subroutine, column E will be available to be used again. Okay? Are there any other questions? But these are very, very good questions. It really helped me to explain the matter in a slightly different way to make it more clear. Yep.
So when we did the first, we started it before. We defined the subroutine, and then we went down straight to 8 and invoked. Then we just left it that whole time. So when we went to 6, shouldn't that actually have been 8 for the post?
You mean on row 10 or on row 11?
11.
On row 11? Okay, let's take a look at row 11. When we get to row 11, which is also indicating what we do on line 6 of the program, at that point, because it is still the end of a subroutine, right? Because line 6 corresponds to end defined sub. It is the end of a subroutine. So once again, we have to perform those 2 steps that we have talked about. The first step is to look up the most recently defined return line number column. Column E is gone at this point, so you only have column D left. Column D says the next line you have to continue execution on is post. And that's why we write down post on row 12 of the spreadsheet. Okay?
But we already did line 6 to end the first subroutine.
But then no one says that you cannot do it again. There's no rule against it. And that's the whole, that's the trick of tracing a subroutine or tracing a recursion, is you have to kind of follow the rules kind of blindly and not really question. We have been there already. Are we going to be there again? The answer is yes. We're going to go back there and do it again if the return line number is telling me that we have to go back on that same line.
So even though we did go to post, it's not line 8. It's actually line 6 because we're ending the subroutine.
Line 6 is the only end of a subroutine in this pseudocode. Line 8 is the invocation of a subroutine. It's the opposite of returning from a subroutine.
I know, that's why I was confused when it said post. Because 8 invokes it and then we're posting?
No, it is not posting. On row 3 or row 4 of the trace, this post is basically a little bit of information that you write down on a piece of paper, so that when you're done with this invocation of the subroutine, then you know, okay, I'm done here, but where am I supposed to go now? The post here on row 4 in column D is going to tell you, to remind you that you're supposed to go to the line that is called post to continue execution when that invocation of the subroutine is done. It's a little crumb of bread, that you leave behind so that you can backtrack and remember where you have been and where you're supposed to go next. Okay. Any other questions about this? Because it is confusing. Is everybody okay with this? Okay. Now, if you guys are okay with this particular example program, which is actually what we talked about on the 25th, because this is actually a file that I captured on October 25th, which is about a week ago. No, that's about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. So now we are going to continue with some new topics. Did I capture any notes the other day? Let me just check quickly. Let's see, did I capture anything on